The three of us today are presenting from Waterloo, Ontario. We are currently located on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral peoples. We name this territory and recognize and honor the original caretakers of this land and the current Indigenous people who continue to live here today.
I think the three of us will introduce ourselves, and we're going to do this by doing an ancestral acknowledgement, which was a practice that began in the Gahu Project by Fanis Juma, who is one of our collaborators, and is about locating ourselves in our own histories. So we have a sense of who we are in relation to the history in the contemporary context, as well as who's in the room together.
Hi, my name is Abigail Amponsah. I am a third-year music therapy student at Laurier, and I'm also a research assistant for the Gahu Project. My family comes from the west coast of Africa, so I'm from Ghana specifically, and from the Ashanti tribe. Both of my parents are from the Ashanti tribe, so that is where I'm from. And I will pass it over to Samantha.
My name is Samantha. My mother is of Scottish and Irish descent, and she was born and raised in Northern Ontario. And my father is Chinese Jamaican from Kingston, Jamaica. And I am also an undergraduate research assistant as a part of the Gahu Project.
I'm Deanna Yerichuk. And my dad is Ukrainian from Alberta, where there's an influx of Ukrainians who came in the early 1900s. And my mom is Scottish, Irish, and a few other heritages. I grew up in Loyalist country along the St. Lawrence River in Ontario. Also, my role in the project, I am the principal investigator of the research portion of the Gahu Project. It's important to focus on this project and to focus on our reflections in the way that it combined music and racial justice, the way it combined uncomfortable conversations and community building, and this project that is trying to take this step towards decolonizing education generally and music education specifically by focusing on Black cultural arts and by centering the voices and experiences of African, Caribbean, and Black identifying students, ACB students.
So, the Gahu Project is a community music initiative that uses the performance of Gahu as a way to explore the challenges and possibilities of creating more inclusive climates in high school classrooms for ACBI students in the Waterloo region. Gahu is a recreational style of music of the Ewe people in Ghana, and it incorporates singing, dancing, and drumming. The project involved over 350 students from 6 different high schools in the Waterloo region. Each school participated in 2 workshops in which students engaged in discussions on racial justice and then learned Gahu together. We also hosted 2 workshops at Adventure for Change, which is a community organization that addresses issues related to poverty and inequity for children, youth, and families, also in the Waterloo region. The workshops culminated with a weekend of events that included a public performance by Baobab Tree Drum and Dance Community from Ottawa, a panel discussion on racial justice and music education, which featured spoken word and musical performances by ACBI students. And on Monday, May 6th, a mass performance of Gahu that brought all of the students from the schools together. So this weekend of events, but especially the mass event, really sought to center Black voices and featured special music, spoken word, and dance performances by ACBI students.
Over.
We are all beautifully gathered here, chanting that Gahu cheer, understanding and appreciating the different cultures with zero fear. We need more events like this to keep going and pushing and take those risks. We, united are powerful enough. I'll say this again and again, and to those who don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's tough.
Project, but I just want to point out a few of the key organizations that we received both financial and in-kind support from. So the first is the African Community Wellness Initiative, or ACWI. This organization was founded by Fanis Juma, who was the project's racial justice educator. I would also like to point out the Center for Sound Music Education, and our project manager, Josh Hill, is currently acting as chairperson for that organization. And I would finally like to recognize SSHRC, which provided funding for the research components of this project.
For the purpose of Gahu, it developed out of asking the question why there isn't enough Black students that are represented in traditional music education experiences. And so the purpose of this Gahu project was to engage Black students in the Black cultural arts and to also center their artistic voices. It was to create opportunities for the school as well as the entire community to engage in conversations about racial justice, anti-Black racism, cultural appropriation, using music that is centered in Black cultural arts. The first portion of the workshop consisted of racial justice education, and then the second part of the workshop contained the music making learning of Gahu.
Equity has to do with the ways in which, like, it's more than equality. It has to do with everybody getting what they need, and flourishing. So people who have in the past have had negative effects of racial injustice. Racial justice has to do with creating conditions so that those people begin to do better and to do well. So a few things that I wanted to highlight about racial justice, that it's not just an idea, it's not just a concept, it's also a practice. So if you believe in racial justice, it means you're actually involved in doing something. So give or take.
And so, as mentioned before, Fanis, who is our racial justice educator for the project, Fanis would have the students start off with an ancestral acknowledgement, similar to what we did in the beginning of this presentation, where students would have to locate themselves, and by using that location for them to acknowledge other people's locations and how that plays a role in the project, and as well as the awareness of others within the circle. And so after the ancestral acknowledgement, there was the goal to raise awareness for learning foundational racial justice concepts. So that included, concepts such as um, anti-racism, anti-Black racism, racial justice, white supremacy, and decolonization. So students would get into small groups and talk about, if they knew these terms and if they didn't, what it meant. They also went on to learn about racial justice identities, how these students can play a role in the conversations about racial justice within their communities. So those identities were being woke or awake, being an activist, being an ally, or being an accomplice. And afterwards, once these racial justice identities were identified, there was a call to action. There was, what were the next steps as a student, either an ACBI student or non-ACBI student? What was their role and how were they going to implement using those identities and using those concepts they learned into their schools as well as within their communities? And so once the racial education component was done, we had our artistic director, Brennan, teach the students Gahu.
Yes, beautiful. Here, now what do you do when you hear this?
The key piece here was trying to name the potential and possibility of cultural appropriation taking place. So Brennan did an amazing job of letting the students know that as a white male, that he was taught by someone who has actually grew up in the culture of Gahu, which was Kwesi Donyo, and he was taught by him. And so through him, he was able to teach Gahu to the students. So he did an amazing job of naming the fact that he is a white male that is teaching Gahu, which is of a different culture from him. We also see the Afrocentric values present in Gahu, that interconnectedness, that singing together, drumming together, all those values that we usually see in Afrocentric approaches. Well as that without the racial justice conversations, the artistic portion of the workshop would not have meant as much. And so it was important for students to learn these concepts in order for them to incorporate that and implement that into the Gahu dance and drumming, for them to understand that this is a different culture that they're learning and the importance of that culture. And when the racial justice component as well as the artistic component is done together, the work is transformative.
But the research project, we developed a participatory action research, and we worked with this group that you're seeing here, a group of students at Black Students Union of one of the high schools. These students were really involved, politically active for quite some time. And so we also wanted to amplify and build on the work they had already been doing. And as participatory action research, if you're not familiar with it, it means that the participants drive the kinds of questions and the modes of analysis that happen. And so we worked with the students to figure out, well, what would be most important for us to focus on, where they wanted to document what was it like, what was the process of centering Black cultural arts in a multi-high school event. They wanted to see how these projects might be important in improving school climates for ACB students. Another key part of our project was in focusing on amplifying, centering Black student experiences, is we incorporated student performances into the final Gahu mass presentation, showcasing their talents in dancing, singing, spoken word. And it also provided a forum for those students to use the arts to articulate their experiences and what needs to be done. Another key role is that the student research that we worked with, they became the spokespeople for the research component of the project. So they presented to the public on stage, and they also did media interviews for the public.
ACBI, African Caribbean, and Black identifying students are not included in the music program at school because there are so many music genres that we listen to today that are derived and influenced by Black cultures. And it's really important to teach and learn the Black cultures in the music programs to make Black students feel more included and important and valued at school.
So I'm just going to close on the research by giving you just a brief overview of some of the themes that emerged from our research. What came up over and over again, that there was a stronger sense of community or connectedness that came through this project. That was observed in increased engagement over the workshops and the final presentation. And so that discomfort seemed to function in building community and in undoing or questioning or becoming aware of the way that colonial processes are at play in high schools. And another key theme, and this is maybe one of the most salient themes, was that the project was fun. That came up over and over again. But again, I think as Abigail focused on, what the data suggests actually is that there was an important combination of a really fun participatory music practice with the hard work of racial justice. And that those two components seemed to be important and seemed to deepen the experiences of each other that they may not have gotten if we did one of those things on their own. Some participants described increased understanding or awareness of anti-Black racism in schools. And perhaps most promising was that some of the participating teachers expressed really significant shifts in their thinking about their music classrooms. They really started thinking about how the classroom was constructed, what the space and the culture was, what kind of repertoire or musical content was there, how that music was being made, what kind of instruments are and are not available, and the kinds of pedagogies that they're using. So there were some promising or positive kinds of developments of the project. There are a couple important challenges to name. I'm going to do that really quickly. First, that there wasn't a lot of ACB student participation, despite massive amounts of recruitment. And participants wanted to see this happen again, and they actually would like to see it happen at high schools, but also extended down into junior high, like grades 7 and 8. They saw a lot of potential there. to work with students at a younger age. And the last thing I just want to point out is that a very small but vocal number of students resisted the racial justice aim, said that this was a form of liberal indoctrination. So I do want to emphasize this was a minority. I think we had 3 instances of the 350 folks who participated over those the workshops and the final project. But I think it's important to name it. It's important to be clear that this project did not universally transform all participants. So that's really important to name. I also think it points to the limit of a time-bound kind of event. And while this had sustained contact in that the project had 2 workshop sessions in the school and then this final session, so at least it wasn't kind of a one and done kind of in and out circumstance, it still was an event and time-bound. And it's clear that there's a need for sustained work, sustained conversations, and sustained exposure to education of familiarity with making music of Black cultural arts for students.
I think the thing that has stuck with me the most from this project is the ancestral acknowledgements that we did at the beginning of each session. My dad is Chinese Jamaican, and I look like my dad's side of the family, but I don't identify with that side of my ancestry really at all. And so doing this ancestral acknowledgement was really, really uncomfortable for me because I had to acknowledge that and kind of own that part of me that I had never really connected with before. And it also just really challenged me to like think about all the ways that I experience white privilege, essentially. I've like had a lot of like Western musical training. Like I was trained Royal Conservatory, and I think when I would then enter into music classrooms in high school, I would kind of hold that training above as like the best. And so in that way, I was kind of like valuing my whiteness over like other forms of learning and education. And I think that kind of came out of a place of like insecurity of me not being comfortable with this like other part of myself. Yeah, this project just really forced me to reflect on the ways that like I have experienced privilege and the ways that I have kind of like perpetuated like systems of racism in music education.
I grew up not having classical training or like that type of training. And in school, like that was what was usually taught, like was more Western classical. Whereas when I was at home, I would be listening to more of like music from back home, like cultural music or like gospel or like African American. So knowing that some like I don't want to say most schools, but like sometimes that wasn't really seen or represented in school curriculum. I think it was just that question of identity in terms of being able to identify yourself within in the music education because of Gahu, and then as well as like being a non-ACBI student, how I'm able to see myself, identify myself in a culture that's not mine, but being able to respect it and share that space with those people.
How can I be of best use as a white person without taking over? But my learning is like, how do I step up when needed? How do I open up the space when I have when I occupy a culture of power? Is that I might get called out on missteps, and that should happen, and that I need to learn from that, and I need to keep showing up. So it's really easy to feel shame because it had good intentions. Like see that as an important learning moment, and to just keep stepping in and keep showing up.
Thank you everyone for watching our presentation, and we hope you're able to take away some gems and we're able to just reflect, I guess, on our presentation and also think about how that can maybe apply to you and the community around you. So thank you.
People been talking about it. We won't just stand here in silence. Can't stop the fire from rising. Whoa, whoa.